Illness is perhaps the greatest equalizer humanity has ever known. It reminds us that beneath every title, every ideology, every bank account, every resume, there exists the same fragile biological organism trying desperately to remain alive and healthy. Medicine begins at precisely that point, not with disease, with vulnerability. And vulnerability creates obligations. There's a peculiar phenomenon that occurs thousands of times every day in hospitals throughout the world. Yet because it is so common, we rarely stop to appreciate how extraordinary it is. A stranger walks into a room, he removes his shirt, or she allows someone she has never met to examine the most private parts of her body. She reveals fears she has never spoken aloud. He admits weakness he has hidden from his own family. Sometimes they confess addictions, sometimes infidelities. Sometimes they tell us they no longer wish to live. Occasionally, they hand us a folded piece of paper with a diagnosis they have not yet found the courage to read. Within minutes, two people who were complete strangers begin discussing life, death, suffering, sex, addiction, grief, finances, family, mortality, and hope. There are remarkably few professions granted this privilege. Medicine is one of them. That privilege did not emerge because physicians are inherently wiser than everyone else, nor because society believed doctors to be morally superior. It emerged because illness changes the nature of human relationships. It forces vulnerability, strips away the illusion of independence. Healthy people often believe they are self-sufficient. Illness reminds us that none of us are. The philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre once observed that vulnerability is not the exception to the human condition. It is the human condition. We spend much of our lives pretending otherwise until an accident or a diagnosis or the passage of time reminds us that dependence is woven into every life. The emergency department taught me this lesson more effectively than any philosopher class ever could. In the emergency department, social status evaporates. The CEO and the janitor wear the same hospital gown. The billionaire and the homeless, they receive the same oxygen mask. A Supreme Court justice and a teenager having her first panic attack both ask the same question with their eyes. Am I going to be okay? Illness is perhaps the greatest equalizer humanity has ever known. It reminds us that beneath every title, every ideology, every bank account, every resume, there exists the same fragile biological organism trying desperately to remain alive and healthy. Medicine begins at precisely that point, not with disease, with vulnerability. And vulnerability creates obligations. Long before there were licensing boards, malpractice lawsuits, electronic medical records, insurance contracts, or hospital corporations, there was a simple moral intuition shared by nearly every civilization. When another human being suffers and you possess the ability to help, you should. The Hippocratic Oath did not invent this idea. It merely formalized something older than written medicine itself. The physician's first obligation was never to the hospital. It was never to an insurer. It was never to a shareholder. It was never even to the profession itself. It was to the patient sitting in front of them. This seems almost embarrassingly obvious. Yet history teaches us that institutions rarely abandon their purpose all at once. They drift a degree at a time, insidiously, a regulation at a time, a metric at a time, a committee at a time. No individual decision appears unreasonable. In fact, most are made with good intentions. Until one day, the physician discovers that much of the day is no longer organized around the patient, but around the machinery that sounds the patient, clicking mouse buttons and typing into the computer for billing reasons. That realization is subtle. It does not arrive with outrage. It arrives with a quiet sadness. You notice yourself looking at a computer while someone tells you about the hardest day in their life. You apologize because prior authorization delayed the medication you know they need. You find yourself calculating documentation requirements while someone sits silently, waiting for reassurance more than treatment. No one enters medicine dreaming of becoming an expert in billing, codes, utilization review, or documentation templates. Those things may be necessary, but necessity is not identity. We should be careful never to confuse the scaffolding for the cathedral. The purpose of scaffolding is to support the construction. If the scaffolding becomes larger than the cathedral, we have misunderstood its purpose. So too with medicine. Hospitals, insurers, regulations, administrators, electronic records, and financial systems exist to support the covenant between the physician and the patient. The moment that covenant begins serving those structures instead, medicine has quietly lost its center, its heart. And perhaps that is the question every generation of physicians must continually ask itself. What exactly is all of this for? Not because the answer is easy, but because forgetting to ask the question may be the beginning of forgetting the patient.